Okay, so we've finished the technical project and the fundamentals of EC2. In fact, you're probably pretty comfortable with setting up EC2 instances in general now. But knowing how to use technology doesn't necessarily teach you the value of the technology or what it can do for you. So let's talk about that. Now that you've got this skill under your belt, what can you do with it and how does it benefit you? And so in this video, we're going to walk through two sets of benefits. Benefits to you and benefits to your company/organization. So let's start with what you can do with this now. Well, the first is very career and job market related. You can demonstrate that you know EC2. You can show potential employers, customers, and clients, or even current employers, customers, and clients, your capabilities in EC2. You can easily spin up any number of servers, load anything you want on them, and then share them with others. For example, you could build out that sample node application we created. Keep that server, call it a project, and slap it on your resume. And that's just the technical part. I'm sure at this point you can also talk about all of the nuances of EC2 as well. Now, this is a very big item for developers. LinkedIn analyzed hundreds of thousands of job postings to determine the most in-demand skill sets for the workplace, and the number one hard skill set in demand was cloud computing. And since AWS is by and far the most dominant player, well, you get the benefits of knowing it. And so that's the big first one. You can demonstrate that you know a very in-demand skill set. Second, you can create low-cost Agile projects. I don't know about you, but for most developers, there's always a side project on the back burner. Whether it's just for learning, a side venture, or even just pure interest, there's usually always one there. Well, EC2, in comparison to a paid software as a service platform like Heroku, well, it's a heck of a lot cheaper. After all, services like Heroku are actually just built on AWS, so most of what you're paying for on Heroku is to not have to understand AWS. There's a number of paid hosting services that do this, every one of them filled with their own barbed wires, gotchas, and limited functionality. Well, guess what? You don't have to go to those overpriced options anymore. If you have a project you want to just try out, well, you now have an extremely simple and straightforward method of doing so. All right, so third, you can learn even more AWS. What? Yeah, I know, weird point, but it's true. The thing is, to truly learn AWS, you needed this foundation and comfort level. With this in place, I'd bet a good deal of money that you're far less intimidated by it now. When folks think AWS, they think of this like some individual skill. And I'd say psychologically, that's one of the biggest barriers to actually learning it. The thing is, if you go in with the expectation that you're going to pick up some unified skill that makes you a master of all AWS, you're going to be very discouraged very fast. The better way to think of AWS is as an umbrella of skills that are related. Even though, for example, EC2 and VPCs are deeply related, they're both very, very large topics on their own. So large that you should really regard them as two separate skill sets. And it's not so much that the operational stuff is hard. I mean, you saw it. We made an EC2 server. It takes about 2 minutes, probably less. But understanding what every single one of those things was, that was a much longer process. And understanding those things takes time. Well, honestly, that's how all the AWS services are. Operationally, they're very easy to set up, but understanding the whys behind what you're doing is the difficult part. Well, since EC2 is at the heart of every major infrastructure and service, having this fundamental under your belt propels you forward. This is great and all, but now we get to tackle the second topic, benefits to your company and organization. Because you can go in and tell your employer or boss, oh, isn't this awesome? I can make a server now in under 5 minutes. And I'm sure they'll be happy for you. But if you don't explain to them how it can help the company, that conversation is going to end pretty quickly. As technologists, it's very easy to get lost in the passion for our craft. There's a lot of times where we want to use something new simply because it's new. Simply because we want personal growth, a new skill set, or even just to satisfy curiosity. But for businesses and business owners, Unless you have a very, very high-minded employer with a very, very large budget, experimenting with new technologies is going to be the last thing that they want to do. So first and foremost, what can you tell them? Well, you can say, hey, there's up to a 70% cost reduction versus traditional data centers. Now, this one has the most weight for companies or organizations that still have their own physical data centers. After all, when you compare the price of a traditional data center, which is ridiculously high because, real estate, security, networking, patching, and all of the labor required, versus a single developer coming in and making a fleet of servers, there is no comparison at all. AWS has some fabulous case studies up on their website, but Kellogg's, so the company that makes all those cereals, saved over $900,000 in costs by using AWS for development and tests. And that's such a great thing to experiment with offloading to a different service. And I'll be sure to link to that case study. Another one was with Capital One, the finance and banking company. They reduced their data centers from 8 down to 3 in 2018, all using AWS. Since then, and due to the great success, Capital One decided that, hey, you know what? We're just going to make all future services and applications built in the cloud on AWS. And again, they're not doing this because it's trendy. That is probably one of the most annoying perceptions to break through. We're not picking the cloud because it's trendy. We're doing this because of the amount of savings it results in, both financial and just productive results from your employees. Now, this 70% cost reduction is the general average that AWS likes to give when moving from traditional data centers to AWS. Specifically using EC2 to replace servers, S3 to replace static file storage, and EBS, which we talked about, so those volumes attaching to an instance, using those to replace block storage. Okay, so let's move to the second thing, faster project iteration and time to market. Even if you've never done anything with traditional data centers, regardless, you have still seen how fast it is to set up an EC2 instance, lightning fast. And using and seeing that script that we built, you can pretty much see how quick it is to set up any code base on a server. And once you've done that, you have a nice URL or IP you can point people to. Compare this to what you'd have to do to try something new out in a traditional data center. The biggest first one is you got to hope that your data center has enough resources. You'd have to go through whatever process your company has in place to get those resources to try your application out. And unless they've streamlined the system in place for developers to add new projects and create new applications, you're probably going to be working alongside a system administrator or something of the like to get this thing up. All of that versus what we did in AWS. I mean, there's really no comparison. And so extremely fast project iteration is the second big win here. I know of companies, major ones, that have entire teams dedicated to doing nothing but patching and updating their infrastructure for launching new initiatives and the like. And so being able to take all of that out of the process of trying something new, I mean, think about it. Suddenly the workflow is just create a code base or the logic you want hosted and put it on an EC2 instance. Now, granted, your company is going to more than likely want more than one EC2 instance, and that's where we get into fleets of EC2 instances, load balancing, traffic between them, and the like, but that's another topic for another day. I do run a full-featured master workshop where we cover an entire zero-to-production professional infrastructure on AWS. If something like that interests you, just keep in touch, make sure you're on my mailing list, and you'll get a heads up when I reopen it. All right, so let's move on to the third benefit here. Increased opportunities from AWS tools and features. And so by this I mean, what if your company wants to dabble in machine learning, in GraphQL-based data, in data lakes, in serverless, in containers? Well, hopefully your local on-site data center is set up to do so. Otherwise, you got to get all those in place first. And that's probably not going to fly with management. But if you're using AWS, well, they have an entire suite of services dedicated to this, like AWS SageMaker. And guess what? If you're using EC2, all of the services integrate seamlessly with whatever you're doing. And what about AI? So artificial intelligence. They have services for that too. In containers, of course, they have ECS and ECS Fargate, which are by and far the most productive container platforms I've ever worked with. With these tools at your disposal, your team and organization will be able to dream up all sorts of stuff. With a traditional data center, it's pretty likely that those dreams would go down the drain once all of the costs and changes required are figured out. But with AWS, just spin up what you want, only pay for what you use, and then turn it off when you're done. And so your newly acquired skill set to EC2 isn't just your very nice introduction to AWS. It can also be the first step for your company to start moving to the cloud. Take a service that maybe runs calculations, and that's it. It's just hard calculations. Put it on an EC2 instance and use that instead of whatever you're using in your data center. Or maybe your team needs a way to quickly debut features to your product manager to test before they're released. Well, use that script I gave you. Granted, you'll need to modify it to match your language, your code base, and your frameworks, but you could easily automate those into one-off servers for testing product features. There's all sorts of things that you can do now. Okay, so those are the 3 benefits that you can talk about with your organization. So all of them again. To you can demonstrate that you know EC2, you can make low-cost Agile projects, and you can learn more AWS. And for your company, there's a huge cost reduction, faster project iteration and time to market, and increased opportunities because of all the services you get access to. Now, obviously, there are a ton more than just the 6 above, but I wanted to give you some easy ones to kick your brain into gear, to help you come up with some ideas of how you can use your newfound skill set to benefit yourself and your company.